Good evening, and thank you for being here. There's $7.7 billion for Vermont to spend, and the governor has laid out how he wants to spend it. Over the course of the next 30 minutes, we're going to highlight the key takeaways from today's budget address, the need-to-know information to help keep you informed. We will welcome VPR reporter Peter Hirschfeld to do a quick analysis and give us a historical context of a budget address and explain what it all means. Then at the end of the show, we're going to welcome two former legislators. They'll give us their expertise and tell us how the governor did. All this and more coming up. Good evening, I'm Connor Cyrus, and welcome to special coverage of the 2022 budget address. Now, there's a lot to discuss, and tonight, we're only going to give you the highlights. For the governor's full budget address, visit vermontpbs.org, or as always, for more information and more in-depth coverage, visit vermontvpr.org. To start, let's explain what the budget address is. The budget address is the governor's wish list for how he wants to spend and save money for the next fiscal year. Peter, you've been following the Vermont legislature now for years, and these budget addresses, they happen every January and are pretty standard practice in the state. I feel normally when Governor Phil Scott gives a budget address, Democrats are listening particularly closely to figure out where he's not forwarding the Democratic agenda. This year, the state has billions of dollars to spend. What makes this year different, and can you speak to the mood going into this year's budget address?
The governor and the legislature normally have to operate within a really confined space when it comes to the budget. And what makes this year different, Connor, is that they suddenly have a universe of new opportunities to explore. Thanks to what Phil Scott rightly characterized, I think, as a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon here. Never before in the history of our country has the federal government injected so much money into the economy. Now, a lot of that money has gone directly to individual Vermonters in the form of supplemental unemployment benefits or increased nutrition assistance benefits. More than $1 billion, though, is available to elected officials to spend largely as they see fit. The legislature's chief economist used a line recently that's really stuck with me when he said, "We are in the midst of a, quote, epic economic experiment." And he's referring there to the level of monetary intervention by the federal government. Governor Phil Scott and the 180 elected members of the Vermont legislature are in the laboratory right now conducting that experiment on Vermonters' behalves. And it's contributed to a mood of excitement and possibility for sure, but also a sense of urgency and obligation because the decisions they make are going to ripple for decades probably.
Some of the key takeaways from the budget address are the workforce development, tax relief, housing, childcare, and physical infrastructure. Now, we're going to start with the workforce development. The governor has long said Vermont needs to attract and keep young people here in the state of Vermont, as you know. So when you hear workforce development, what does it mean? Simply put, it's a plan to help the longevity of Vermont's economy by training people who are willing to work. Let's take a listen to why the governor says it's important.
Since February 2020, we've lost 24,000 people from our workforce. That 24,000 is larger than the population of every city and town in Vermont other than Burlington. It's bigger than some counties. It's greater than the populations of Williamstown, Johnson, Highgate, Heartland, Pownell, Underhill, and Hyde Park combined. 24,000 is more workers than in the construction and lodging sectors put together.
Now, some of the highlights when it comes to how the governor wants to spend this money, he wants to put $15 million budget to adjust and keep nurses. He wants $18 million for existing funds to train, retain, and recruit healthcare and mental health workers. He wants $8.5 million over the course of the next 3 years for remote worker incentive programs. Now, this is all just a way for the governor to build a future for Vermont.
But as I said before, if we don't focus on the trades, we won't have people to maintain our hospitals, transport goods, build homes, pave roads, or do the work we need to support our communities. So my budget dedicates $10 million to reduce education costs for those working towards jobs in the trades, like CDL drivers, plumbers, and welders, as well as a nursing degree.
If workforce development is Governor Scott's biggest priority, addressing the housing shortage would be a close second. We heard him say during his State of the State address that the housing crisis touches almost every part of Vermont's economy.
Between BAA and this budget, I propose $15 million to encourage the construction of homes for middle-income Vermonters like this teacher. And with another $25 million for VHIP, we can continue to transform rundown or vacant units into livable homes. To see how well this program is working, just ask any of the families who have moved from homelessness into newly renovated apartments across the state, from Brattleboro to Bennington, Springfield to Rutland, and Barry to Lindenville and beyond. And we should invest another $105 million for affordable mixed-income housing.
Another priority for the governor is to make tax cuts. And this proposal lays out major tax cuts in several different aspects of Vermont life. He says this is his way of putting money back into the hands of Vermonters. He calls this plan progressive.
Let's continue our work to expand access to affordable and high-quality childcare with changes to our child care financial assistance program. With an additional $12 million, we can reduce the burden of missed days on parents and providers and give families more options for care and for summer and after-school programs. It would also reduce expenses for these families. For example, two parents making $58,000 a year with two young kids in childcare could save nearly $3,000 a year.
And that's just one way that Governor Scott's budget will address the child care shortage. Governor Scott also wants to see improvements in physical infrastructure around the state. That includes investing $71.9 million in water, sewer, stormwater, roads, and bridges, investing in climate change and community resilience. And something that surprised me was he wants to invest in Vermont state colleges. He wants to put $5 million additional into the VSC-based funding and $10 million added to the UVM-based funding. I now want to bring back VPR reporter Peter Hirschfeld. Peter, we just heard some of the major takeaways from the governor's 2022 budget address. For people at home that are either shaking their heads or applauding the governor, what happens now and how quickly will it happen? How quickly will we see the governor be able to take action on the plan that he wants?
Well, there's an old saying in state level politics, Connor, and it goes, the governor proposes and the legislature disposes. Today, the governor made his proposal, and you can be sure that as the legislative session progresses, much of what he unveiled will either get rejected outright by lawmakers or significantly altered during the legislative process. I spoke with House Speaker Jill Krowinski today. She's already raising some real concerns about the $14.4 million that the governor wants to spend to entice out-of-state workers to move to Vermont. She says the folks she's talking to want Vermont to invest its resources in Vermonters, and she says this relocation incentive proposal just doesn't meet that mark. Senate President Pro Tem Becca Balint, meanwhile, is signaling skepticism over the governor's tax relief package. She says it's scattershot, not focused on a tangible policy outcome. And she says the legislature is open to tax cuts, but that it wants to target those tax cuts at the constituencies that need them most. And Becca Balint says that's young working families. We'll see plenty more differences between the legislature and the governor emerge as the budget debate progresses in Montpelier. But one thing that both Krowinski and Balint did say is that they're grateful that this is going to be a debate over what programs to create or boost and not over which ones to cut.
And Peter, do we have a timeline for when we can expect to see this?
Well, it's going to be a months-long process, Connor, and I don't imagine we'll see House lawmakers approve a final budget until May, probably.
That's VPR reporter Peter Hirschfeld. Peter, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Connor.
I now want to welcome Mitzi Johnson, former Speaker of the House. Mitzi, thank you so much for being here.
So happy to be here.
We also have Kurt Wright, a former representative. Kurt, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here. Happy to be here with the speaker.
Oh, and I thank you guys so much for being here. So we just heard from Republican Governor Phil Scott. He gave his annual budget address. Mitzi, I want to start with you. What are your initial thoughts on how the governor did and the key takeaways?
Well, I completely agree with him that this is really an historic time. In my 10 years on the Appropriations Committee, we were all spent every year closing medium to large gaps. Kurt and I were both in the legislature at the same time there, and so to have this kind of opportunity available, this much money available, is tremendous. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the details. Budget addresses are always the fun, good news, but really looking forward to seeing the details and excited about where the opportunities are to really transform Vermont to a different future.
Now, Kurt, I want to take that same question to you. How do you think the governor did, and what are your initial thoughts?
Well, as Mitzi said, we hear the State of the State speech first, and that's kind of the broad overview, and then everybody waits for this budget address where we get the details. That's where the rubber kind of hits the road. I think it was a good opening gambit for the governor, starting this session out with his budget address. I did talk to a couple of legislators. One who said to me, it's not a Republican, I'll just say that, who said, what's not to like? We're spending a lot more money in areas that we need to spend, and we're doing it without any tax increases. So I think Vermonters probably overall will like this. There's a lot of money being spent in a lot of really key areas. And at the same time, he's held the line and reduced taxes, found ways to make Vermont a little bit more affordable for many Vermonters.
Now, Mitzi, were there any areas during the budget address where you were underwhelmed or thought there were important aspects of Vermont life that were being ignored?
Gosh, with this much money floating around, it's hard to ignore big chunks. I think the key places he touched on, the key things that are going to really move us forward years to come, housing, climate change and resilience initiatives, water quality, education, higher education. There were, some significant investments in transportation infrastructure and our health infrastructure. All those things are amazing. And to have that opportunity is so important right now. I would say that, the underwhelming thing, which for me was that there's all of this money for this opportunity, and rather than seeing a bit here and a bit there, I wanted to see a little more comprehensive transformation, so that we're not just putting some additional money in some small places for a few years, but we're using this opportunity with this additional funding, and then in this, very uncertain time, to get us to a new way of, rolling out education or workforce training, or some of these key initiatives that we've been struggling with for a long time. But I think, overall, there's some very important investments that I think Vermont will benefit from for many years.
And Mitzi, one of the things that I think we as Vermonters talk about a lot is childcare. And you were in the legislature when that bill that comes into effect, I think next year, that no Vermonter is going to have to pay more than 10% of their income. Did this budget address the childcare issue enough, in your opinion?
I'm not sure. I appreciate that there was a substantial increase in childcare, and there aren't enough details on the first day of the budget address and those early budget documents to know whether it addresses things in a short-term or a long-term way. That will be the key thing. As many people already knew, and everybody is aware of now, if you don't have quality, affordable childcare and quality, safe education, you don't have a workforce, right? The two are tied, and so to do one, you need the other. So I'm pleased that there are steps, and I'll look forward to finding out, what the details really are for the long-term transformation. I think we do have an opportunity to do a little more, for working families with young kids, things like Vermont child tax credits, things that put money into those families' hands now that will help them meet all of their families' needs, things that really target a demographic that Vermont needs, so that those young families can put down roots, and really helps families that need that help. So I think that could be another piece of that package to help young families in Vermont.
Now, Kurt, was there anything that you wanted to hear that was not brought up today?
Yeah, I'll tell you where I thought it lacked just a little bit was, we have this huge pension issue that's been out there. There is a pension reform bill that's been proposed, and I really didn't hear the governor. He talked about, making our contribution of $394 million, I think the figure was, but he really didn't talk much about the reform proposal that's out here and give us some insight into where he is on that idea. I would like to have heard a little bit more about that. The other thing I would like to have heard a little bit more about, and I know there was a massive amount in here about where the money's all going and all the different areas, and it's all good. But the thing, we do have a crisis also in recruitment and retention with our law enforcement across the state in Burlington and across the state of Vermont. We have people that are leaving for a variety of reasons, and there are very few in the pipeline to replace them. So I would like to have heard a little bit more from the governor about what the plan is to help really in that, what really is almost a crisis in terms of being able to solve that problem of recruitment and retention with our law enforcement.
The governor did talk about, he did bring up law enforcement, and I believe he spoke about wanting new training and new recruitment forces. Where does it need to be? As Mitzi talked about, this is just kind of like the beginning, right? And then everything gets duked out later on. Where in terms of law enforcement do things need to be addressed?
Well, I'm not sure. I would just like to have heard more from the governor about what the plan is. I know he did talk about law enforcement. I would like to have heard a little bit more about that because we are in such a bad spot with this issue. And so I don't know myself what the answer is. I would like to just have heard a little bit more from the governor about what his answer is.
And Kurt, pre-K through 12, schools, teachers, administrators, they were kind of left out of this conversation today. As someone who served on the Education Committee in the House, why do you think that was?
Well, he did talk about putting more money into after-school programs. He did talk about a lot of different issues in education, higher education, and K through 12 and preschool. I think there was some issues and items in here that he talked about spending more money in there as well.
And Mitzi, there's a lot of money, as we keep talking about, historic amounts of money on the table for Vermonters. Is the governor making the right choice in investing in one-time spending with that money?
I think one-time or short-term spending is a much wiser investment than building out a lot of new programs that somehow somebody's going to have to pay for in a few years. So things that are going to cost money year after year after year after year, brand new programs and tax credits, substantial reductions of taxes. Those things have to be paid for every single year. And so those, when this money dries up, Vermonters are stuck with that bill. So I think largely on some one-time things is the most appropriate way to do it. But I want to make sure that those one-time things or 2 to 3 year kinds of things are things that are going to put us in a better place moving forward. They're not just great short-term things right now, but that legislators, if they can picture themselves sitting around the table in 10 years when there's the next recession, I want them to sit there in 10 years saying, I'm really glad that in 2022 we made these decisions for our long-term future. I think that's very important. And so things like the debt reduction that he mentioned, and some of the housing, climate change, long-term education things. And I would concur with Kurt that I wished I'd heard a little bit more about the pensions. That's going to swallow our budgets into the future if we don't seriously address them. And there is a proposal on the table that's a very good step forward. I think we need to be doing more because it's solved about a third of the problem, but there's a substantial amount of liability left. And so I think I would have liked a little more, aggressive action there from the governor.
And as we look into the future, Kurt, Governor Scott wants to spend a lot of money on workforce development, training nurses, putting money into CTE. Is that the right choice to recruit and maintain young people to Vermont?
Well, I think that that's something everybody's focusing on, workforce development and bringing more. It's been one of his themes for a long time, is bringing more taxpayers into the state of Vermont, not raising taxes, but bringing more taxpayers here. And we know there was a press conference just recently with Senator Sanders and the governor and other legislative leaders talking about the nursing shortage. So he is trying to speak to that issue in here as well. So I think that is, and I will, in relation to that, one of the things I think that will cause some controversy, at least with some people, is another $8 million or so going into the remote worker program. We know that our auditor actually has been very critical of that, and in terms of what we get back from it. The governor and others have been, are very high in that program, thinking we're getting a huge bang for the buck. But he is pumping another $8 million into the remote worker program. Again, I think that probably comes with a little bit of controversy, I think.
And Mitzi, is this the best way for the state to be spending its money on workforce development to try to recruit and maintain young Vermonters?
I think we've long established that Vermont has a demographic issue with climate refugees coming, with people who are really enjoying Vermont's outdoors environment and quality of life here, and some of the smaller schools and open spaces given COVID. I think it's an excellent opportunity to try to attract young people and families here. I don't know that I would do it in that same way, but I think it is a good idea to take advantage of all of the things that Vermont has to offer that we all know, the things that we love about Vermont. Many other people are finding out that they can love it too, given how many jobs and employers are letting people work remotely now. It gives Vermont a way to let people enjoy what we have and still work in jobs and sectors that Vermont doesn't offer.
And Kurt, we have a very democratic legislature. We have a Republican governor. Where do you think the clashes are going to be on this budget and getting things passed?
Great question. I think that it'll be interesting to see how the legislature comes down on the governor's proposal to give money back to taxpayers. He has called it his progressive. Interesting to use the word progressive. I know he doesn't mean it in that way, but progressive spending package for tax relief. And he has proposed giving $45 million of the education fund back in a kind of a rebate, as he called it, for taxpayers that overpaid. He also has a $50 million progressive tax relief package is what he called it. And in that, he wants to exempt military families' retirement income from state taxes. That's something that's been out there for a long time and has never made it to the finish line. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens finally. Something that's been near and dear to my heart as someone that proposed this, and we did see some movement on this in my last term, which was exempting more seniors from income tax. He is moving to exempt more retirees from state income tax. I think that's a good thing, but we'll see what the legislature thinks. Also expanding the earned income tax credit is part of his, which is obviously for lower wage earners. But I think it's going to be interesting to see where the legislature stands on this, if they have different ideas, because as Mindy well knows, a lot of different ideas can come from a lot of different legislators and the committees. And will the legislature go along with spending half of that education $90 million surplus in a rebate back to Vermonters, or do they have some different ideas?
That's Kurt Wright, a former representative, and Mitzi Johnson, the former Speaker of the House. Thank you two for being here. That's today's show. Thank you for tuning in to special coverage of Governor Phil Scott's 2022 budget address. I'm Connor Cyrus. I appreciate you being here, and we'll talk again soon.